All right. So welcome back. This is the Virtual Residency Workshop 2022. It's Wednesday, June 29th. This is the early morning session. And our speaker for this session is Dirk Colbry from the Cyber Ambassadors program and one of our co-PIs on the CIFTED, the Certified Cyber Infrastructure Facilitator training and development program. And Dirk's topic today is Let's Talk, communicating that there's a problem. So I'm turning the show over to Dirk. Take it away, Dirk.
Can you all hear me?
Perfectly.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and get started. Remember that this is the Cyber Ambassador program, so I have to do my obligatory, that's a hard word, that they pay for a lot of the development of this curriculum. There are 9 modules. We're going to do 4 of them this week, and we've already done First Contact yesterday. We're going to do Let's Talk today. And then tomorrow I'm going to do Leading the Change and Leading parts of Leading the Change and Leading with Principle. So another plug for the rest of the Cyber Ambassador workshops, which we are conducting as virtual workshops this summer, if you want to try it out. And I'm also really looking for people who want to take these materials back to their universities, institutions, or professional groups and give their own workshops, in which case we're doing a Train the Trainers event. I would encourage you to go. It's all free. It's here at Michigan, and it's beautiful. All right, so we're going to start with another chatter. Just to remind you, what I want you to do is type in the answer to a question, and then I'm going to give you a few seconds, an awkward pause, and then I'll do 3, 2, 1 chat, and then you're supposed to hit enter at that point, and then all of your answers will pop up. So let's practice this real quick. So where in the world are you Zooming from? So type that into your chat. And in 3, 2, 1, chat, hit enter. Boston, California, Richmond, Ohio, Clemson, there was Athens, Indiana, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Florida, Albuquerque, Virginia, Earth, Wyoming, Tennessee. I love it. We're all coming from all over the place. I think there was an international one, but it scrolled by so fast that I didn't get to see it. So I'll be using chatters periodically through this presentation just to help you engage a little bit and to get other people's perspective. So today's agenda, or this module's agenda, is we're going to define what an effective problem solving, what we mean by effective problem solving. And then we'll go into different types of problems and their solutions to those problems. And then we're going to do some practice problem solving, or practice communicating problem solving. And then we're going to talk a little bit about communication style and do some more practice. So that's what we're going to do today. All of the Cyber Ambassador developed curriculum has learning goals. We build these learning goals and then we adapt the curriculum to match the learning goals. I won't read them, but they're there if you're so interested. So let's start with the big question: is how do we define a problem? And there are lots of different definitions. So, and they're all really right. I'm just going to come up with a definition that we're going to use today as Cyber Ambassadors and the research facilitators that we do. So let's just ask, how do you define a problem? So type in an answer to that question into your chat window, and let me give you a few seconds. And then hit enter in 3, 2, 1, chat. Urgency, severity, complexity, something to solve, symptoms and expectations, goals impeding progress in a goal, unexpected outcomes, behavior, pain, some obstacle we have to overcome, something that needs solved quickly, lack of knowledge, not working, a problem solving. These are all excellent answers. And I looked up, you have to do this in, Google Dictionary. A matter or situation regarded as unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. So that's a dictionary definition, although there also seems to be a mathematics definition that's probably a little more formal. So let's define the problem. I think some of you said this already, so I'll just use your definition. we have a problem where we're trying to reach a goal, and then there's a barrier to that goal. And so that's how we define a problem. How do we define a solution? Well, the solution is how we remove that barrier in some way, either by going around it, changing the goal, maybe even, or just getting the barrier out of the way from reaching our goal. But I want to go beyond that. I want to go on to how do we define an effective solution, right? So a solution to a problem is removing the barrier or getting around the barrier, but an effective solution is what? Well, we solve the problem and then find a solution and implement a plan to that problem, right? That's solving a problem. But we're going to say also maintaining the relationship. And I said this yesterday when we talked about intake interviews. You're trying to identify the problem and maintain the relationship. This is the same thing. Both are important to effective problem solving. And so we're going to focus on techniques that focus on both. It's easy to solve a problem without maintaining a relationship, but we want to solve problems while maintaining the relationship. So let's go into the different types of problems. So let's just start with an example. Let's say we have a problem. There's a production line, like in a factory, that makes some sort of widget. Now I want to assume that we're the line manager, and we want to ask the members of the night shift to increase production speed so that we can make more widgets faster. That's what we're challenged to do as the manager, right? The night shift is not doing as well as the day shift, and so we have to motivate them. What types of problems might prevent the night shift from making more widgets than the day shifts? That's a question. So as the manager, we know the night shift's not making as many widgets as the day shift. So what might be the source of that problem? So come up with an idea of why, and I don't care, any idea that you have as a manager on why the night shift produces less widgets than the day shift. What is the cause of that problem? I want you to type that into the chat. And I want you to hit enter in 3, 2, 1, chat. Lack of communications between shifts, less hours in the night, lack of sleep rest, they're tired. Less resources help available during night shift, they're sleepy, cafeterias closed. Effective divorces, machinery efficiency decreases through the day, poor communication, delivery schedule. Those are all valid possible solution problems to night shift not producing as much as day shift. And so I want to group these a little bit in categories. I want to think about all these problems you just typed in and think about them as 3 different types of categories. There are ability problems. For example, many people feel less productive during the night shift, right? That's an ability problem. Motivational problem, they're just tired and bored and stressed. Or interpersonal, actually an ability problem might also be machinery efficiency decreases through the day, right? It has nothing to do with the night shift's motivation, but maybe the machines are not doing as well at night. And then a motivational problem is, they're just tired and sleepy. And then an interpersonal problem might be that, the night shift manager is a real big meanie. And so I want to think about these and ways we can solve it. So what we want to do once we have identified a problem, we want to think through all the possible types of sources of the problem. Is it an ability problem? Is it a motivational problem? And then is it an interpersonal problem? And sometimes we don't know. So we have to always ask and try to dig into it a little bit. But the goal here is if we can identify that it's an ability problem, there are ways to tackle ability problems. If we can identify that it's a motivational problem, there are ways to attack motivational problems, and similarly, there are ways to attack interpersonal problems. So let's go through those. Ability problem is really saying, I can't do this for a lack of something. So there's a lack of resources, knowledge, a skill, experience, right there. The person can't do the problem because they don't have something they need. And so solving ability problems actually turns out to be easy. First, you have to make sure you know what's going on and that it's actually an ability problem, right? Because if it is, then, well, you don't want to assume that it's an ability problem and just jump to it and give people things that they don't need. But if it truly is an ability problem, you can identify what the person needs and give it to them. So in the widget case, maybe it needs more people, maybe it needs an upgrade to equipment. You don't know, but those are all things that can be done. So ability problems are actually pretty easy to solve. If you can truly identify that it's a true ability problem and it's a lack of something that the workers have, then all you have to do is give them what they lack. And then hopefully that will solve the problem. Motivational problems, though, are different. I don't want to do this, right? And so maybe the problem's inconvenient, it's undesirable, it's difficult or boring. And so motivational problems are harder than ability problems because your job now is to figure out how to motivate them. And so solving motivational problems, you still have to ask questions, truly identify if it's a motivational problems, and don't assume you understand other people's motivations. So that's why you have to create a communication, a channel for communication. The way you motivate people, there are two ways to motivate people. That you motivate by natural consequences. What's the impact if the task is not complete? And impose consequences. What can you do in this case as a manager to impact the person directly? Now, when we're thinking through motivational or natural consequences and imposed consequences, natural consequences are almost always better. If you can motivate someone based on a natural consequence, like, oh, if you don't produce enough widgets, the company won't make our deadlines, and we'll lose customers. If that motivates someone, then that will motivate them into the future, right? If the natural consequence of not doing the task motivates them, and they just didn't know the natural consequence or hadn't thought through those natural consequences, then if you can tell them those natural consequences and that then motivates them, they should motivate on to the future. Imposed consequences are things that you can do, and you can do two types of imposed consequences. You can do a I'm trying to find the right words, positive and negative, carrot and stick, right? You can positively motivate someone by giving them bonuses, by giving them raises, or giving them other privileges that, especially in this job situation. You can negatively impose someone by threatening to fire them or threatening to take away privileges of some sort. And that is how you can impose a consequences. And as a manager, it's easy to impose consequences because you're the boss. But generally, imposed consequences don't work as well as natural consequences. And overall, positive consequences are better than negative consequences. But remember, the difference between the new natural consequences and the imposed consequences is that if I impose a consequence, you might do the thing that I asked you to do now, but that doesn't mean you'll do it the next time, because you're going to want that positive consequence. These are hard words. It's too early for me. You're going to want those positive consequences again and again. They're going to be expected every time that the same issue comes up. And then whatever you do, whatever consequence you provide, you need to follow up with them and make sure that those consequences are imposed if they succeed in the problem or if they fail in the problem. The other reason not to do a negative consequence is that it tends to negatively impact the relationship. And since our goal when we're solving a problem is to solve the problem and maintain the relationship, a negative consequence can really not help with the relationship. And then there was a question in the chat about, can there be a combination of problems? Absolutely. We break these problems down into the three types so that you can see what you need to do to motivate or to solve each type of problem. But most problems are actually squishy. There's a combination of these, and it gets really hard to know which one you're trying to solve. There is an order which we can try to solve them, But it really involves all of these solutions you'll see is ask questions, figure out what's going on, and try to isolate the core root of the problem. Because if you can do that, that's going to make a big difference. So looking at our widget example, maybe we're not going to ship our product on time and we're going to lose customers is a good enough of natural consequence that they'll motivate them, or I could give them more money if they produce more, and that could be a positive reinforcement. Those are all options. All right, the third one is actually sort of the hard one, and interpersonal problems is sort of a motivational problem. Sometimes can be an ability problem as well, but it's really where the relationship has already broken down. And their response is, you can't make me do this, in which case you have to focus on the relationship. It doesn't matter what the problem is, or even if there's another underlying source to that problem. If there's an interpersonal problem and there's a conflict there, you need to address that as soon as you can. And so there are lots of things that can impact, just regular personality conflicts, negative experiences in the past, lack of mutual respect and misunderstandings. All these things can break down that relationship that you have with the other person. And when we're trying to communicate a problem, you have to fix that relationship first. So again, with all these problems, you have to ask questions and listen carefully, right? Acknowledge emotions without judgments. You can say things like, this seems really challenging. You don't want to ignore an emotion. You always want to acknowledge it. And no emotion or feeling is wrong, right? It is their feeling, they're having it. It is not wrong for them to have it. And so acknowledge the frustration that they might be having, acknowledge the emotion. Try to avoid assumptions. This is always the case, but don't jump to conclusions. And then if someone's having a strong emotion, don't assume, this is always true also, but consider both sides of the thing. What have you been doing? Why might they be feeling this way? And is there something that you could improve? Because communication is a two-way street. And then a key one I'm going to talk a little bit about in a second is pay attention to communication style differences and adjust your style accordingly, because style in communication can have a huge impact of how people perceive you. All right, I said all that. So in the widget example, someone just is really upset and crying. You can say, hey, I see that you're upset. What's going on? And then again, you're trying to build that relationship. All right. Strong emotion is hard. Like really strong emotion can be extremely hard. They can get into the way of logical thinking. So I don't care how much you're trying to solve a problem. If there's strong emotion involved, it doesn't matter how logical your solution is. It doesn't actually matter. The facts can be lost in the confusion. And then our job now is not to win the argument. Our job is to solve the emotional problem. Also, strong feelings can act, people can say things when there are strong feelings that seem like logic, but are actually something called a fool's choice, where it falls to blend between two bad choices. You can say, for example, you cheat on a test. You can either cheat on a test or lose a scholarship. That's called a false dilemma. Sometimes we get these when we have strong emotions, where we see one option or one terrible option or another terrible option. And rarely are false choices or fool's choices the case. Rarely there is life binary. And so when you're in that strong emotion, it's hard to engage your logic. And it's sometimes you see only things in one way or the other. Right. And so your job is to try to get the emotions down, either yours or the others, and then get out of those fool's choices and say, what are the other options? Can I think outside of my binary solution and come up with something? For example, there are always alternatives. Reschedule a test, complete extra credit, ask for help, get a job, take a semester off, find a tutor. There's always something else you can do. You just have to be in an emotional state, or your person you're helping has to be in an emotional state to see the other possible choices as options. So there's a technique. There's a lot of techniques to addressing strong emotions. So one of the first things is to manage your own. So stay calm and model effective coping behaviors. So take pause, take deep breath. Do not ignore the emotions. Acknowledge that the emotion is there and it's important, but you don't have to have emotions fully reflected to be supportive. So asking neutral questions are always helpful. How are you doing? Is everything okay? And listening very carefully to understand what's going on, because also emotions tend to have layers. And so the thing that they come out of their mouth first might not be the core problem. And so listening and truly listening can help find those emotions. So by focusing on the individual and their needs at the time to help them get through, help them through breathing. Problem solving can happen later as long as your job there is to be there for them. All right. So let's do, I want to do an activity. So I want you all to think about the following scenario, and then I want you to come up with solutions. All right. So think about this. Your team has a report due in 2 days, right before the start of a 2-week holiday. Everyone is anxious to take a break and has been working overtime to complete the information. But when you review the draft this morning, you realize there's a significant inconsistencies. What is the problem and how do you solve it? Now, obviously, there's not enough data for you to give an exact answers, right? But can you identify this problem and solve it? Oh, and I forgot we were going to do this. Henry, do we have time to do breakout rooms?
I think so.
All right, let's do it. We got time. All right. I'm going to ask Henry or whoever else is one of the leaders is to help me set up some breakout rooms. What I want you to do right now is to change your name. I know some of you can't participate actively in a breakout room due to office situations or whatnot. So what I want you to do is change your name by right-clicking or in Zoom. I want you to change your name in Zoom to ZZ_. If you can't participate in a breakout room, we'll still put you in a breakout room so you get to be there, but the ZZ_ is there to indicate that you can't be an active participant. And that way, when we make rooms, we'll make sure that we don't make rooms with everybody being a ZZ. And then we're going to put approximately 4 to 5 people in each room. If you can, write down the room number when it comes active so that if you get kicked out for any reason, we can put you back in the same room. And I'm going to just say the person whose name comes first alphabetically will be the timekeeper. Introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, just so we get to know each other a little better. And then discuss this example that I just showed you. And then I really want you to think about what is the core problem of this. All right, so we're going to try this. Let me see. Are breakout rooms ready, or is that still being worked on? I can't do breakout rooms.
Give me about 1 minute.
Yeah, we can do. Okay, so let's go back.
You let me know when you're ready for me to create them.
Go ahead. I'll just keep talking.
Okay. I don't know when it's going to actually put people in the rooms, but
yeah, they have to hit accept, and you guys can go ahead and accept. But remember, your team has a report due in 2 days. Okay. I want you to understand what the problem is and how you're going to solve it, and make any assumptions that you can. Oh, and if you want a name change, go into participant list, click on the participant list, and then your name will appear. Go find your name. It's usually at the top. Click on more, and then there's a rename option there. Sorry if I didn't explain that. So under your participant list, there might be other ways to do it, but this is how I do it. Go to your participant list, which is in the Zoom bar. And there are currently 107 people in it, and click on your name and then click rename. No problem. All right, let's give this a try, and then we'll come back and we'll see how it goes and what are your thoughts through this problem. All right, now the question is, everybody's leaving us.
Everybody get in their rooms?
People are heading that way.
Alrighty.
Oh, and I didn't say how much time. We can do that for, we'll go to 10:30. Hey, Henry.
Yeah, hang on.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry, I'm juggling because there's a lot of ZZs.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. In fact, I've got a couple people in a room where there's only CCs.
You can always throw them in other
way
rooms.
too many ZZs. Hang on. I think
Yeah,
we're
if you
not gonna
made
be
me
able to
co-host,
do-
I might be able to help, but
in most cases, we're not going to be able to do more than a couple of actual participants per room.
all right. I'll have to adjust my instructions for this next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, we got so many ZZs. And then we got a few rooms that have like a lot of people, and I'm really hesitant to force them to move.
All right. Am I going to do, while you're doing that, I'm going to check something else.
Okay. I'm moving some of the ZZs around as well. And then some people haven't joined their rooms yet. Hang on. Okay, I'm gonna move some people to room 7. Room 19. I'm just trying to do some consolidation a little bit here. I think I didn't realize how many ZZs there would be, so I made too many rooms.
I shouldn't have done that on you. I'm sorry.
No. I'm figuring it out. It just takes a little thought.
There's a bunch of you still in the room that haven't joined your breakouts.
Oh, hang on. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm gonna fix it. So give me a minute. Trying to find places where there are people active, but not enough people. Okay, room 8.
I was in room 10, but I was the only one without Z's.
Okay, I'm trying to fix that problem now. I created too many rooms is the problem because I didn't realize how many people would go ZZ. So now I'm just trying to create rooms that don't have only one ZZ in them. Okay, room 16. I'm gonna start doing some more consolidation. Ooh, okay.
All right, we're going to.
I'm emptying out some rooms so that we can make this work. Especially rooms where nobody actually signed in.
Where did Henry go?
I'm here.
Oh, you're not on my picture anymore. There you are.
Okay, hang on. I'm just going to move Chris into room 11. Move the others as well.
Are you still messing around, Henry?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I mean, at some point we should just probably call it.
Okay, well, whenever you're done.
Well, can you send them a broadcast? Because I can't.
Sure, what would you like me to say?
Say 3 more minutes.
Sent.
And then we'll course correct. It'll be fine.
Okay.
Henry, do you know if you cancel the breakout room, if there's a timer or if it will bring them
Yeah,
right
I
back?
think there's usually 1 minute when you say close the rooms, but I'm not going to swear to that.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter that much. So if you want to do that in the next few seconds, I'll be fine.
Just go ahead and do it now.
Yeah, I'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah, so 60 seconds.
This
Let me know when everybody's back.
It's just a matter of a few seconds and then they'll all start pouring in. There we go.
Welcome back, everyone. So I'm going to ask you how this went in a second. Let me get to the right slide. So as you were all in the breakout rooms, I wrote some notes to myself for next time. I need to give better instructions. So I acknowledge that I didn't give you good enough instructions. Specifically what you should be doing in the breakout rooms, although I think some of you figured it out. And I didn't tell you how long you were going to be in there. So that was my bad. We also didn't give Henry proper instructions or any time to figure it out. So the next time I'm going to make notes to calculate the number of rooms as the total number of participants minus anybody who put ZZ in their name divided by 5. And that should get us the approximate number of rooms we need, or maybe divided by 4. And then I'm also going to, next time we do this, add a co-host so they can help with other rooms. And if you have any other suggestions on how we can do this better, we will be doing this in the future. And I always encourage you to throw a suggestion in a chat or send me an email, might even be better. And then we can make it better next time. So how did it go? So I asked you to review this problem. What did your team say? Did anybody have a good conversation and was not too crippled by the misinformation? So tell me what happened in your room and help and see where we can go with this discussion. Now I'm putting someone on the spot to talk.
All right, I'll go for it.
Thank you.
So our group, the first thing we talked about was finding the source of inconsistencies without blaming and pointing the finger at people. When you're talking about being backed up to the idea of having a 2-week holiday, you know how people feel about their time off and the idea of that being changed. If we were the team lead based off of it saying your team, it's, do you do a documentation review and edit by yourself, or do you get folks together in a meeting prior to identify their roles and to kind of encourage them to cooperate to keep people abreast? You want to be specific about your inconsistencies and you want to work with people to see where they best fit. And then ultimately, does this have to happen over the holiday? Is it possible that we can push this back? There are decisions, and you talked about, was it cheating on the test versus losing your scholarship? It's, to what effect do you have people working over a holiday versus the final output and what your expectations are for quality work, when you can do it later that next week and assure that we have quality work happening?
Yeah, I think those are great points. I mean, I think you highlighted the idea that you don't actually know the source of the problem. Someone said in chat, is it even the wrong draft? And so communicating the problems to your team, I think, is a good first step. Martin, you had something to say? Or include? I guess that was too abrupt.
Thank you. In our team, it boiled down to mindset. Well, I boiled it down to mindset. And my past experience has always been, there's no problems with the holidays because we also always have a mindset I'm right now with a new team, and yeah, that's the trend. Mindset. On 4th of July, we're going to do this, and who's going to be on call? Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, and yeah, it's team building and mindset, in my opinion, to not allow for this to be problems. Yeah.
Right. I mean, problems happen, but setting the expectations and building those relationships are key to solving these problems. So let's move on. I took longer on this than I have, and I don't want to run out of time. So let's talk a little bit about other things that can impact problems. That was our instructions. That was my acknowledgement that I made a mistake. And so let's talk a little bit about a specific type of thing that gets in the way of problem solving across the board. And that is that problem solving is hard because you have to have effective communication, right? There has to, in order to identify what the problem is, the core problem, and then use one of our techniques to solve that core problem, all of them required that we understood the problem effectively, and that requires communication. And then communication, effective communication, is built off of relationships. If you don't have a relationship with someone, you can't do the communication. And relationships are built off of trust, respect, and effort, right? And so in order to be an effective problem solver, you have to solve the problem and maintain the relationships. That means you have to build this, and it's called a pyramid of trust. You have to build trust, which will then build relationships and then allow for the effective communication. And so this can be really hard. And sometimes you just don't like people, or sometimes you don't get along. And knowing why that is can be very helpful for helping you solve problems. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about communication, specifically that's the way you communicate matters. And there's a great book by Deborah Tannen, the references in the slides. And the basic conclusion is we form unconscious opinions about people based on their communication style. And so what do we mean by style? Things like accent, culture, pitch of voice, speed, and pacing. I'm going very fast right now, so that's a style of my communication. And whether I allow or whether the speaker allows or pauses for other people to speak. And the thing is, these vary by person and culture, right? And so there is no right or wrong way to speak as far as style is concerned. We tend to speak the way our families speak. We tend to speak the way our cultures speak. And but the funny thing is we tend to like people with communication styles similar to our own. And so that's where the problems lie, is we tend to, conversely, some not like people that have styles different to our own. That person speaks too fast. That person speaks too slow. I can't understand what they're saying, right? And so that can affect our perception of each other, which can affect our relationships with each other. So I like this quote a lot. Many of our let me try that again. I'll slow down. Many of our motives, so obvious to us, are never perceived by the people we talk to. Many instances of rudeness, stubbornness, inconsiderateness, or refusal to cooperate are really caused by differences in conversation style. And I think this is yeah, I agree. This is a great read. So I read Deborah Tannen's book just out of grad school, and I have a story to tell. So I had a fellow grad student in my lab who I was new to the lab. I wasn't new to grad school, but I was new to the lab. And the person that I was paired up with someone that everybody loved. And so I got to go to this lab, and everybody was saying, "Oh, you're lucky, Dirk. You get to be paired up with this other grad student and you get to work on a project together. You're so lucky. Knowing, that student is awesome." And so I said, "Great." And I was so excited. And so I met with the student. We talked about the research. I wanted to come up with a plan for how we were going to move forward. And this person that everybody likes, that I didn't really know, was totally, the best word I could use was stoic to me. They didn't engage me when I was having this meeting with them. I was saying, "What are we going to do? Let's break up this problem." I had zero emotion from them, and very I got a very negative feeling from it. And I couldn't understand why, because everybody likes this person. And then we picked two sides of the problem that we were going to solve. I had one side of the problem, they had the other side of the problem, and then we were going to come together and hopefully move on with the research. I met with the person a couple of times with that stoic, that non-engagement. I stopped meeting with them because we weren't engaging, we weren't solving any problems. And then a few months later, our advisor comes to me and says, Dirk, this paper is terrible. You need to rewrite it and make it sound better. And I look at a paper that is about my research. It has my figures in it. But I didn't write this paper and my name's not on this paper. It's the other graduate student. So I went to the advisor and said, I didn't write this paper. My name isn't even on this paper yet. This is my research. And then the advisor said, oh, that must be a mistake. Your name should be on it. And I got this weird vibe that this coworker of mine was trying to steal my research. And it all comes down to, frankly, a difference in culture that I was not aware of. And I learned about it, and someone recommended this book, which gave me some insight, but there was a cultural difference between me and this other student. I come from a culture in the United States where it's common to form strong relationships with peers. And so in our culture, it's common to form relationship with siblings, a kind of conspiratorial relationships that you might have, and be trying to defeat the higher ups, right? You're against the world. It's you against the world, or your peers. In other cultures, different peer relationships form where peers are actually adversarial, and the stronger relationships are between like parents and children, or bosses and employees. And so in those cultures, the adversarial role is in the peers, where in our culture, the adversarial role, it tends to be within the hierarchy. I had no idea this is good. Deborah Tannen explains it much better than me. But when I reflected back on that relationship with that grad student, what I realized over the time was, as soon as I was made a peer with them, it became adversarial in their eyes. And then this whole problem arose, and I didn't realize it. And I don't think they realized it either. Where everybody else in the lab, there was no adversarial role. And so they got along with them well. And I think my over desire to work with them also created the perception that I was trying to steal their stuff. And they counteracted by stealing my stuff first, which was not the perception and probably not the correct response, but it made sense in the context. And once I understood that better, I was able to go back and repair these relationships. And I think those cultural distances are so subtle, and you can quickly judge to come to conclusions that are incorrect without fully understanding what's going on. All right, sorry, long story. I hope that was interesting. All right, so let's do a little bit of practice. When's this session over? I'm totally off calendar.
About
10:15?
quarter after, but if you run a little long, it's not a crisis.
No, I'm just trying to judge where I am. All right. So what I want to talk about now is when there's a problem, when someone else has a problem, or you need to communicate a problem to someone else, that is the hard thing to do. How do I communicate to someone that there's a problem? The natural reaction for them is to, if I said they did something wrong, or I said they're doing something wrong, the natural reaction is for them to argue. And that's not what we want. We do not want arguments. We want conversations. Our goal is not to call them out. Our goal is to start a conversation, explaining what the problem is and trying to come up with a solution. And do that without making assumptions and all this stuff. So I'm going to give you an algorithm for doing this. Now, we're all pretty much computer people. We should like algorithms. So I want to invite conversation by sharing expectations and observations. So when you want to communicate a problem, you want to share expectations and the observations. So expectations are what we think, wish, or assume to be the truth. That is what we want. And then our observations are facts. What do we know based on the actual experience or data? And generally, if there's a problem, those observations do not match the expectations. That's the assumption. So what are our expectations and what are our observations? And then when we communicate those two things, we want to do it in a very formulaic way. We communicate expectations first, and then observations. And we do that on purpose because when we feel defenses, which we tend to when people communicate a problem to us, we're not necessarily listening carefully, and we're most likely to remember the last thing we heard. So if the last thing we heard is an observation, it's hard to argue with observations. It's easier to argue about expectations. So if we start with the expectations and then end with the observations, we kind of short circuit the argument. And this is a very effective tool because our goal is to start a conversation, not an argument. By ending with observations, the natural tendency to argue, we were going to argue with the last thing you said, but if it was a fact, if it was an observation, it's hard to argue with, and that short circuits is the problem, and it starts helping the person who you're communicating the problem to, that to guide them towards solutions. Now, it doesn't always work, but it is a very effective technique when you're trying to communicate a problem and you're worried, especially that it might start an argument. All right, so we're going to practice that algorithm in a second, but I want you to think about what happens if you communicate a problem and you still disagree. It doesn't mean we can't work together, right? If our expectations and observations or our opinions may be different, right? We may disagree, but there's usually something underlying that we agree on. You can often agree to disagree. All right, and so the ABCs are the way I remember to do this. Agree by finding points where you agree, build on those points, and then compare and work through them. So I have another little story that I like to tell, that I have a colleague here at our at Michigan State, where we were in the same group, and we fundamentally disagreed about almost everything. We were constantly knocking heads, and since I get to tell the story, I get to portray them in the bad light because obviously they were bad. But I felt like they put bureaucracy and built walls and constantly put up barriers just to have bureaucracy, walls, and barriers. I felt like that they liked those, and that those barriers didn't need to be there, and they just inhibited problem solving. So every time I would suggest doing something, they wanted a form to fill out. They wanted a procedure to follow that would build barriers and make it harder to do the thing that I wanted. And I got so frustrated with this. And we were constantly fighting. I would say, you know, our job is to solve problems, not build barriers. And we would have the same argument over and over and over again. And what I realized is that wasn't going to change. That was the nature of our personalities. And some of those bureaucracies were actually quite helpful. And so I could see value in what they're doing. I just didn't feel like we needed to do it everywhere. And so I broke down the problem to the ABCs, and I agreed. We looked at what we both agreed at, and what we found a foundation, basically. We both agreed that our primary goal was to support the students in our department. We both cared deeply about the success of our students. That was we talked it through in that moment when we both realized that we both deeply agreed. It didn't matter that we had different solutions. We both could agree on something, and then we could build on that agreement. We still often have different opinions about how to solve a problem, but I can always roll it back to that foundation that we both agree that we care the most about the students, and any solution we had, we could compare it to how does that support the student the best. And honestly, it helped short circuit a bunch of these conversations, and it really got us over these cultural differences. But it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of communication. And these are hard conversations to have, but the professionals that are here in the room can go and work and push through these conversations. So I have a way to practice all of this, okay? And so we're going to do some practice here. And one of the things, I gave you an algorithm, right? I gave you an algorithm. You do expectations, then observations. And we talked about natural consequences. We talked about imposed consequences. We talked about all those different things. And one thing it's hard to do is when you're in a conversation with someone, it is often extremely hard to do it right the first time, right? especially when you're learning these skills. It's like, oh my gosh, what was that algorithm Dirk said? Expectations and observations, or was it observations then expectations, right? You're not going to be thinking that through when you're trying to communicate a problem in real time in a meeting with someone. Yet you can. And the way you do it is by practice. And it's hard to practice in the moment. And so the way I like to practice is through email. Now, I'm going to make a caveat here. Email is not always the best way to communicate. We're using it as a mechanism to make it easier to practice. But sometimes because there's no nonverbal communication, especially when emotions are high, it can be very difficult to convey emotion through email. So I don't recommend this as necessarily the solution for a specific problem. But what it can do is help you practice, because you can write an email and then rewrite the email and rewrite the email until you get it right. You can review these materials. You can think it through. Are you communicating the problem effectively? Are you maintaining the relationship? Email is wonderful because you get to rewrite yourself. I highly recommend, if you get an email and you want to respond back using these techniques, always take out the to field out of the email before you start typing, because I think it can be therapeutic to type the email you want to type, but you always run the risk of hitting enter by mistake. So don't do that. Take out the to field, write your email, go ahead, do the therapeutic email first, especially if the to field's gone, but then rewrite it and say, what do you really need to do to communicate the problem and build that relationship? A flaming email back in response is not going to build that relationship. We don't want to do it. It might make us feel better in the second, but it will not be a long-term solution. So our goal is to use our tools. All right. So we're going to do some examples. Now, also, I've reduced these emails to something that will fit on a slide. So obviously there's more details here that we can't know necessarily, but let's look at this example. Dear Jazz, your jobs are going over resource limits and causing the nodes to go down. You need to stop running them immediately or we will disable your account. Yeah, more J names. That's funny. So poor Jazz here is going over resource limits and breaking nodes on the cluster. Is this a good response from the HPC team to communicate? I would argue no, it's not. It's very argumentative. It's very direct, right? What can we do by using the techniques to make this a better email? So here's an example. Dear Jazz, the HPC system limits jobs in order to make the resources available to everyone. In that case, that's actually, that is what we expect. We use system limits in order to make resources available. We notice that your jobs are consistently going over these limits. So our expectation is that we go, we have the limits. Our observation is that you're going over these limits. And then the natural consequence of this is that the nodes are going down. Would you please set up an appointment so we can talk about your resources need and try to identify a solution. So in this case, they're just expectations versus observations, and then a request for a follow-up. It is much better than you need to stop them running a meeting or we'll disable your account, right? All right, here's another one. Dear Dr. Shao, from now on, please come to me with all questions and comments instead of the IT staff. I realize there is a problem on the system that is impacting your work, but my staff is trying their best to fix the problem and your constant interruptions are distracting them and make fixing the problem take longer. I had this problem when I was the HPC director, that I had a researcher constantly going to my staff directly and knocking on their door and pounding on the window while they were trying to solve their problem. It was not very helpful. Here's a solution, right? We want to do our expectations. The IT department has a ticketing system for our users to submit requests and let us know where there are problems. I understand that you came into the office 3 times last week asking our staff to resolve a problem impacting your work. So that's the expectation, the observation. They can't argue that they came in 3 times. I like using numbers too in our observations because, especially if they're true, factual numbers, that it just makes it a fact and not something you can easily argue with. And then a natural consequence. I rely on the ticketing system to track problems and assign staff to address them. Please make sure you submit a ticket when you have an IT concern. If you do not receive a response within 24 or 48 hours, feel free to email me directly. And so this is me stepping in to the middle so that my staff can solve the problem, but also trying to build that relationship with the researcher. And you see, by using the formula and probably 8 or 9 edits to the email, you can get to a point where it's professional, it builds that relationship, but yet it clearly states your expectations, your observations, and what will happen if something goes wrong. All right. Dear Ali, I am sick and tired of you interrupting me during meetings. My opinion is just as important as yours. Please stop. Okay, so what's the problem here? Is Chris is feeling interrupted during the meetings. What's the source of that problem? Anybody want to type in chat, why is Chris constantly being interrupted by Ali in the meetings?
Well, there's probably no space being given for people to comment or ask questions, or maybe they haven't set norms for the meeting on how to
Maybe
manage
they
it.
haven't set norms. Maybe one person, it could very well be a cultural difference or a communication style difference, right? I actually just did this to you and I didn't realize it. I am sorry. But in the culture I am, it's very common for my family to start talking as the other person is finishing a thought. We're always talking on top of each other. That is culturally norm. And if you don't do that, you never get a word in edgewise in my family. That is the norm. And as long as everyone plays by that rules, it's fine. It works great for us. But when I have friends come into our family and we're not talking on top of each other, I have to consciously say, oh, that is a culture in our family. They might not have that. And I have to adjust mine pacing. And I literally add spaces to when I talk to allow other people to chime in, even though to make my my habits and tendencies or my cultural way of talking still inclusive of the other people. And so these are things that you can learn about yourself, but it also might be true that Ali is in that same kind of situation, does not realize it, and maybe just needs a little help getting through it. Telling them, please stop, is not necessarily helpful. So let's try to do a little bit better. Even though it might feel good, let's try it a little bit. And then I can say, the ground rules for our weekly meetings include making sure that everyone has a chance to contribute to the conversation. Now, this does assume that your group has ground rules, but let's assume that you have good practices and you have ground rules. I noticed that you're interrupting me twice in the meeting this morning, which meant I wasn't able to fully explain my idea for the project. That's a natural consequence of being interrupted. I'd like to present my ideas at our next meeting. Would you please include 10 minutes for me on the agenda? Hopefully Ali's a great person and realizes that, oh, I didn't want to do that, but maybe Ali's a jerk and maybe they did, but this at least communicates the problem in a way that is intending to build that relationship instead of breaking it down. Does this make sense to everybody? All right, let me check how many more of these I got. Oh, I like this one anyways. I'm going to do this one. I really like the energy you are bringing to the team. However, I noticed that you have stopped writing weekly reports. We really need them. You have also created a wonderful workspace. Keep up the good work. This is actually a technique that has been taught in business since the 80s. It is considered a correct way to communicate a problem without any evidence against it. And the research has shown this is definitely not a correct way. So if you've ever been told to sandwich a criticism, stop doing that. It is not an effective way to communicate a problem. What a sandwiching is you say something nice, and then you say something mean, and then you say something nice. I'm not mean. You say your problem. And so the problem with this is people remember the last thing they see, and also people skim email. If this is done in email, you read this, I'm like, I'm really like the energy, blah, blah, blah. You have created a wonderful workspace, blah, blah, blah. Keep up the good work. I'm good. I don't even have to notice that the second sentence was stopped writing weekly reports, right? So you need to be explicit on what the problem is as best you can. Now, again, there's a cultural issue. I had to be able to fit these emails on the screen. Sometimes the way I'm writing these emails on the screen can be very terse. that is not what I'm trying to do. You might have a little bit more. You can say nice things about them. Just don't sandwich it. Make it the focus of the email, not some byproduct in the middle of the email. You might want to broaden it out so that you're building that relationship using other words and other continuing a conversation. But for this email, I'm going to show you a very short answer because it fits on the screen. All right. Each member of our team is expected to submit a weekly progress report. I haven't received your updates for the last 2 weeks, which means that I don't know the current status of your project. Please schedule an appointment within the next 3 days so that we can talk about your progress. What I like about expectations versus observations is it doesn't make any real judgments about the source of the problem, right? I'm not saying you're lazy. I'm not saying you didn't even write those. You might have write those reports and you sent them in, but they're in my spam box and I don't even know it, right? The whole point is to say what the expectation is, what the observation is, and then open up that conversation. Because if you start guessing what this problem is, you don't give the other person a chance if that's not the right guess. And so you want to avoid guessing what the problem is as much as problem, and just state your expectations and your observations and let them tell you what the problem is, even if it seems obvious to you. All right. I think this is the last one, so we'll just do this one. I really like, dear Dr. Horton, I really like your class. However, I'm having trouble understanding your accent. Would it be possible to go to Dr. Adderall's section instead? Adderall section. I didn't realize I did that. Thank you, Reese. So here's a problem where they can't understand an accent. And this is really troublesome, right? If you're a student and you're in a class and you're struggling with an accent, that can be very difficult. I know that a lot of my international students in my classes often struggle, and I try really hard to give them resources to help them because I do talk fast and I try to slow down when I think about it, but I don't always remember to. And so I try to encourage my students to get other resources. For example, I always provide my slides. I try to write in the notes field what I was going to say in the slides so that they have, if they're and I always turn on closed captioning when I teach so that they can have that too. But that's me. And Dr. Horton might not even realize that their accent is a problem. And so that's an interesting thing. And is it their accent or is it something else too? So this is a response we tried to respond to that. I know that lectures are an important part of your class and I've been attending regularly. However, I'm having trouble understanding you during class, which means that I'm falling behind. Could I come to your office hours on Friday to talk about this? Now, instead of just suggesting the solution that I want to go to a different section, which may be the solution you want, you're really allowing the Dr. Horton to chime in and come up with a solution with you. And it just makes the problem solving process much easier. All right. Oh, we're not doing evaluations. So our goal in this session was to define problems solving and effective communication, right? We wanted to define effective problem solving, which is solving the problem by removing or getting rid of the barriers or going around the barriers, but also maintaining that relationship. And to me, the key part is maintaining that relationship. If you don't maintain the relationship, if you just solve the problem now, you might not be able to solve the problem in the future, right? If someone comes to you with a problem and you say, oh, there's an easy solution, just do this, but you didn't maintain that relationship, that means that when they might not be able to come to you in the future. So an easy problem, if an employee is not doing the work you want, an easy thing to solve that problem is fire that employee. That's not building the relationship. And so the next time that problem is solved, you don't have an employee anymore. So we talked about the characteristics of 3 common types of problem: motivational problems, ability problems, and interpersonal problems. And we talked a little bit about how we diagnose it by opening up those communications and really focusing in on the interpersonal problem and the emotional, especially strong emotion. If there's a problem there with strong emotion, you got to address that first before you can address any of the other problems. And then we talked about the importance of communication style, which is really key to how we view other people, and understanding your own communication style can significantly help you connect with people who have different communication styles. You can't rely on them to know Deborah Tannen's book, but you can rely on yourself to know that communication style is important, and that if you understand your own, you might be able to help with other people. All right. Any questions or any thoughts about this session?
Dirk, I had a question on one of the email examples, if I
Sure.
could. It's the one, let's see, where it was about someone coming and interrupting your staff, bothering your staff 3 times. And that you were telling them, go to the ticket system. We have a ticket system for this and that kind of thing, right?
Right.
So in this one, the expectation is, you as the manager's expectation of how this operates, right? I guess my question is, if you look at it from Dr. Shio's standpoint, the expectation might be, I need help right away when I need it.
Sure.
Right. So this email may not yield the result because the response may come back, well, I can't wait 48 hours. I need it immediately. And so I don't know, we just get a lot of these kind of things. So that's why I'm kind of bringing it up. Any suggestions on where do you take it from here if it's mismatched expectations, right? Because he's not wrong. He has different expectations, right? So is it just clarifying that we can't meet those expectations, or?
Yeah, you're actually asking a really great question, because I don't know if I have the solution.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't. I'm
So,
just curious if you had any experience with it.
Well, this comes from an experience that is very dear to my heart, because it wounded me very greatly. I literally had, and I'll tell you the whole story. The faculty was going into the back office and knocking on the doors and yelling at my staff. When this was our highest priority, their problem was our highest problem that day. We knew that there was a problem on the system. I felt terribly horrible because we had this problem, right? I knew there was a problem. We all felt horrible. It was our highest priority. And so this person was in there yelling at my staff. We were already feeling crappy. And so I needed to find a way to short circuit this, because I needed to be a buffer for my staff. And so I walked in and I actually did not send an email. I sat down, I said, look, we need to talk. And I told them, you know what, this is our highest priority. We currently don't know what's wrong. We feel horrible about it. But I can't, and I went into a longer discussion, and I didn't use this technique very well, clearly, or it just didn't work, which it might not. But I talked to this faculty person for a while, and I said, look, by you knocking on the door, you're actually inhibiting them from solving this problem. They are working actively on it, and you're not helping. You can come to me and talk to me. Please don't talk to them. And his response to me was to swear at me and my progeny, and all members of my family and my whole entire line. He really, really threw out the swearing words. And I got angry and I kicked him out of my office. I really wish I would have handled that better. To this day, I've been trying to repair that the relationship with that faculty, and I think we've achieved a mutual. We're able to be in the same room together, but I felt bad because it was our problem. It was something that we did on our system that caused them not to be able to do their research, but they were not able to work with us. They could only yell at us, and the swearing, basically they got out of proportion, and it became to the point where it's funny. I shot them out of my office, and we still worked 24 hours. We worked constantly to solve that problem. It wasn't that I didn't think the problem was valuable. It wasn't even that I thought the researcher felt bad. I just didn't address the emotion as much as I probably should have. And I feel bad about that to this day. And I've been studying, and I really feel I would do better now, but I don't know what I would do but different.
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah.
And so those situations happen. And honestly, in the literature, I actually found there's a name for that situation. It's called a zonk, where you do all the things right and it still doesn't go right. Sometimes there are zonks in the world. And and it's okay. We learn from them. We try to be better from them, but we also just move on. And again, like I could hold resentment to that faculty, especially for swearing for me. I mean, that's really unprofessional. Who does that? But I really don't. They were emotionally charged. I get it. And I've tried to repair that relationship just so that I can be the better person. Really, it's an ego thing. I want to be the better person. And so, and I can't rely on them forever repairing that relationship. So I will try my best. And honestly, it is better. I see them a lot because we run in the same circles. And so, you know, it's been many years now and it's perfectly fine. So I got to tell you a really personal story. Thank you. And I think we're over time. Henry, how are you doing?
Well, you're only over time in the most literal sense. You're 2 minutes over time. But so if you want to take a little more time, that's fine. But I would say certainly not a huge amount more.
Anybody have any other thoughts or questions they want to include? There's some great chat going on. I didn't read it all, but I've been reading along.
I would like to thank you, Dr. Colbry. I learned a lot from your experience and your solution. And I also realized that the relationship is very important factor for the success of the computing supports. Myself have learned a lot of the lesson. Most of our success came from relationship with the professor, with the tech support of the supercomputer. We need to get help. And then normally I thought first when a professor they have a due date, they are stuck with the research, especially with the SPC. The only solution for them is to solution of the computing. Without the result, they stuck with the research. Then a lot of things happen to that faculty. So we put our situation in the professor. So that's why our SVT try our best, and even it's not our fault, but we have to consider it is our fault for not giving the satisfactory result to the professor. And you know that we are human being. We are not 100% perfect. If we're perfect, we are not human being. So we try to work and to live as we are, but the honesty with the sincerity, and then we try our best when possible. But yeah, that's where we learned from you today. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you for that summary. I think that was interesting. I think both Henry and I mean, we the virtual residency, we talk a lot about professional skills, or what I call professional skills, but the soft skills, the communication skills, the relationship skills. I got the Cyber Ambassador grant because I made a very clear argument that a lot of problems that happened in large scale scientific problems that involved computing, if you did a postmortem of the big projects that failed, and you really looked at the reasons for their failure, rarely was it a technical problem. Rarely. The big projects failed because there was some fundamental lack of communication or relationship building or something in the team that was trying to solve the problem. And I made that argument to the National Science Foundation, and I said, hey, look, we all are technical experts, but what we really need to know is how to build those relationships, because that will make more successful science and research in the future. And guess what? The National Science Foundation agreed with me, and that's why we got the grant. So I have telling you all this because I truly believe it, but that's why we're trying to do this, what we're doing. All right.
This is Phil. This is
ahead.
Phil Boarding. I just have a short comment. There's a wonderful book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. It's worth reading once you get to a certain level of maturity, and you can read it when you're a teenager or you can read it when you're 40 years old. But it basically says that we communicate at 3 levels. We communicate at the child level, the parent level, and the adult level. Okay. And if you're starting a new team and they come from all different places, it might be worth everybody reading that book and having a discussion about, because we're scientists and we're solving a problem, because we're researchers, we're going to work on a problem. We're going to try and stay in the adult state at all times.
Oh, I'm going
Anyway,
to look into this book. Thank you.
that's a very interesting book to read, and I highly recommend it. It's a little dated in the stories in it, so you'll have to translate it from the 1970s to the 2020s. But the basic argument of the level of communication between child, parent, and adult is the mapping of the story. And yeah, at any rate, thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I read a lot of these books. I hadn't heard of that one. It feels like I should have, so I'm going to go look that up next. All right. I think that's good enough for me, Henry.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dirk. That's been fantastic. I think we got an enormous amount out of that discussion. Let me go ahead and turn off the recording.